Social Work Talks. My name is Greg Wright. Today's issue is one involving Baltimore, and it is the Squeegee kids there. Squeegee kids are young people who basically panhandle and wash car windows at intersections. It sounds like an innocent thing, but it's actually proved to be a controversial issue with a lot of the business owners saying that they are disrupting business there, and they're also turning people away from Baltimore. So we're going to have a conversation with a Dr. Kyla Liggett-Creel, who is a associate clinical professor at the School of Social Work at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. Dr. K actually did a study to look more into the story of the Squeegee kids and why they are doing what they are doing. So I welcome you to Social Work Talks, Dr. K.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. I appreciate the invitation. I'm excited to talk about this topic.
Thank you. So, a Squeegee kid, what is that exactly? How old are they, and where are these young people coming from?
So we refer to the young people as squeegee workers, and or sometimes it's youth who squeegee because person first. So they can really range in age. We have seen kids that are as young as 8 years old out there, and they could be up, to 24, 25 years old. They are from Baltimore. And there's, various reasons that they're out there that, we'll certainly talk about. Most of them are male, about 98%. And the vast majority, if not 100%, are African American.
Yeah. So, what is a controversy over them? Because I live in Baltimore. There are like panhandlers at intersections of all races, male and like females. But it seems like there's been a visceral reaction to like people who like squeegee for some reason. What are the reasons why the folks in like Baltimore and the visitors to that city are having problems with them?
So you can't talk about that without talking about bias. You just can't. I mean, to your point, there are panhandlers of all races. And so on certain streets, if you drive up the street, you're going to see white panhandlers on the roads. They're going to be holding signs saying, please give me money. I'm, whatever the issue is. They're not getting the same level of attention. Again, you have to look at the demographics that we're describing. We're talking about young Black men. And so I think that because of racial bias, because of the white gaze, um, so that's one piece that there are people who are like, oh my God, they're threatening, they're aggressive. Well, hold on, let's think about the words that are being used, and we can apply those directly to, the historical racism, current racism of describing Black men as scary, right? So
Hmm.
when they see five young men coming towards their car, there is this bias that comes up where it's like, oh my God, they're gonna attack me, and it's like, no, they're gonna wash your window. And if you say no, many of the young people will put a heart on your window and wave and say, have a good day, right? So I think that is driving quite a bit of this reaction, in my opinion. That you cannot take out the racial component of this. I think that there are, the vast majority of young people who are squeegeeing are respectful when somebody says, no, don't touch my car. I don't want that. Please don't do that. Um, there is a small percentage, a small group of young people who maybe they don't respect that, right? And they're like, no, I'm going to wash your window anyways. Sometimes they want money. Sometimes they're just like, I washed your window. Have a good day, right? And then there's even a smaller number of young people who they have other things going on. You don't really know what's happening. But yes, are they hitting a car with their squeegee? Yes, that might happen. Did they, pull a scam with Cash App? Yep, that happened. But we're talking about 150 to 200 young people, and these incidents of, actual damage to cars or, taking money on Cash App or, whatever, you're talking about a handful. It's not all of the young people who squeegee. Um, but because of media and the narrative that has been put out there, it's like, oh, all the squeegee workers are doing this. And that's just not true. And
Yeah,
I would say, well, go ahead.
yeah. Well, I also wanted to like say, Baltimore. I mean, I've lived there for a decade myself, and my daughter is a graduate of the School of Social Work there as well. Just a shout out to you. But it's a city of like haves and have nots, and it's
That's
also
right.
um, gentrifying slowly in
Yep.
a similar way to what happened in DC about 30 miles distance. So I'm wondering, is like this a economic thing too? Are there like people there who are gentrifiers moving in, and they don't want to like see that, like they don't want to see the like poverty. They want to enjoy the like harbor, the aquarium, the restaurants, uh the like stadiums, but they don't want to kind of acknowledge that there's a lot of economic disparities going on in Baltimore.
100%. And, you cannot talk about squeegee workers without looking at the historical racism that has happened in Baltimore. And then that takes us to today of gentrification. Baltimore is the birthplace of redlining. This is where it started nationally, where, they said, okay, well, here are predominantly black neighborhoods, and we're going to say banks can't give money to open businesses, to buy homes, to invest in those neighborhoods because they're predominantly black. And so Lawrence Brown did this work where, they literally had maps and they circled neighborhoods with red and said, okay, you cannot invest in these neighborhoods because they're predominantly black. Well, if you then look at who are the squeegee workers, they're coming from those neighborhoods. They are coming from the redlined neighborhoods, right? So that's the historical that now applies to today. And then you are 100% right. There are two Baltimores. There is the Inner Harbor, there is Fells Point, there is, certain neighborhoods, going to the stadium where people are like, we're going to come in and this is going to be quote unquote our space. So then when you have young people who are standing there like, they're not going to say this, but, they're having to stand there to help feed their families at the age of 14. That is the inconvenient truth. That is something that's like, oh, that's not what we want to see. And so, yeah, you definitely have this clash. And then again, you put in that bias. And now it's like, oh, no, no, I'm coming in for a night at theater and then go to a nice restaurant. And now I have five young men coming and, saying they want to wash my car. Like those two things are not working together.
Yeah.
And that's why there has to be a narrative change.
You are at a organization. It's called the Collaborative. Could you tell us a bit more about that and your work there?
Sure. So the collaborative is part of the University of Maryland School of Social Work. And really, what our focus is making sure that the voices and experiences of people with lived experience are at the table, are driving the programming, driving evaluations, that their voices are being listened to and heard. So, we work with various partners on that. We have sort of three buckets of work that we do. We do youth development, we do violence prevention, and then we do consulting work within the community.
Yeah. So when I read the news about squeegee kids, almost all the time it's negative. When you are reading social like media comments on them, it's always like, well, Baltimore is a rat hole, and the reason why is that they have these youth here, etc. So it's really like bias, and you don't hear their voices a lot. Interestingly, I learned, and this is why we're having a conversation, that you actually did a study where you heard them and why they are out here. And I really want to find out, how did you do that study? What did you like learn, and how is it informing your social work practice there?
Yeah, so Yeah, I wanted to make sure the youth were being heard, their voices were being heard. So one, people use, study and research and all of that, but I think it's important to recognize that, quote unquote research has been done to the Black community for generations, right? For hundreds of years. And so I want to make sure that, we weren't studying them, we were lifting up their voices and making sure that they were being heard because as you said there are a lot everybody's talking about this, right, but very few people are talking with the youth, and making sure that the youth story is being heard. So I what the way I did it was I contacted some credible messengers. These are guys who have been out, in the community. Sometimes they were out in on the corners. They were returning citizens, so they've been imprisoned and then they've been released in the past couple of years. They knew the kids who squeegee. So I asked them to connect me with the young people. I met with a handful of youth who squeegee and said, what is it that you want people to know about your community? And your community being the squeegee worker community, right? And so they came up with the questions and said, well, I want people to know these things, right? So they created the survey. And then I said, okay, well, you've created this wonderful survey. Go out and collect the data. Go and talk to your community, talk to your peers, ask them these questions, and then we'll come back and go over the responses. So, as I said, there's about 150 to 200 squeegee workers, and they got 31 surveys collected, which is, pretty good representation. And then I met with them again with a larger group. So we had 16 squeegee workers come together and we went through the data. Okay, X amount of people said this. And then ask more qualitative questions like, does this ring true to you? Why do you think this is? What does this really mean? How does this really impact young people? Um, and then from that conversation, we took notes, and that conversation was facilitated by youth, right? So it was youth facilitating the conversation with youth. I was the secretary in the room and took notes. And then, I wrote up just quotes and put it in a PowerPoint and then met with a subset of youth again, so about five of the workers, and said, okay, this is what I heard you say. Is this accurate? And again, these were quotes. It wasn't my interpretation, it was just direct quotes. They read through it and said, yep, that's accurate. And then I said, okay, well, how do you feel about presenting this to the Squeegee Collaborative, which is a group of about 120 to 140 people who have convened for the past 3 months to really talk about this, and what we can do to try to address some of these challenges. So they then presented the outcomes from both the quantitative and qualitative data gathering, and then answered questions that people, have regarding the data, the statements, things like that. I think two things were important to lift up about some of the information that we did. And one was, people want to talk about accountability for the squeegee workers, right? So, or enforcement is, like clear the corners, right? Like if they're on the corner, you should arrest them, charge them, all this other stuff. So accountability kept being a conversation. But, I said to the youth, like, you are not the only ones that are accountable in this situation. There are systems. And as social workers, we're always thinking, right? Bronfenbrenner, like individual, family, community, policy. So let's go through that. What are the systems that are impacting you that you engage with, and what has that impact been? And so they went through and talked about, let's talk about education, let's talk about housing, let's talk about employment, right? Like these are the systems we have to look at. So that's one thing. The second thing is, when we were going through the PowerPoint, I had to put pictures on the PowerPoint because of the literacy issues
Hmm.
that some of these young people are facing. And we're talking about 21-year-olds where the direct quotes were from them. This is language they use. This is not something, I'm not writing a, high level, whatever. And I had to put pictures because they couldn't read on this slide. So I think those are important things that people have to understand. But that was the process of the, development and collection of the data and how the findings were reported out to the community.
Yeah, yeah. So you like found out that the system, like people are like blaming them and like saying, go get like a job. But you're finding that when you look at their like systems, they don't have the education. Sometimes there are not jobs available. Baltimore also has a transportation like issue. It's really hard and it's also expensive to go to places where there are like work. So I really want to find out what was their like story, like why were they out there?
Yeah, so there are several things that came up. So one, the vast majority of the young people said, "I'm out here because if I don't do this, my brothers and sisters aren't going to eat. We're not going to be able to pay rent. My family cannot afford the bills that are coming in. And so I have to make up that gap between what's coming in and what it costs to live in Baltimore, right? So that was one thing is that the vast majority of the kids were saying that, like, I'm helping to pay the bills of the family. We had kids where they were saying, I am the only income for the family, and I have five brothers and sisters.
Mm.
So, and they're, 17 years old and they're supporting five kids. So that's one thing. But system wide, so you mentioned education. They talked about, look, why would I go to school? Sometimes I'm not even there and I'm still getting passed. So why would I even go? I'm just getting passed through, right? It doesn't matter if I'm there. Some kids were saying, I was in a school. I had to go into, a special school because there was an incident at my original school. I went there. It was, right by my house. Great, but I was only allowed to go there for 45 days. Then they assigned me to a different school, which required me to take two buses to get there. It was on the other side of Baltimore, so it might take me an hour and a half to get there. Well, that's a system issue. Like that is not okay that we're telling, a 16-year-old take two buses, go an hour and a half by yourself to the other side of Baltimore. Like that doesn't even make sense, right? And then the education is a direct correlation with employment. There were young people who graduated from high school. They learned a trade so that they could be a certified X, whatever that X is. And they had all of the skills, but when it came time to take the certification exam, they can't pass it because they don't have the literacy skills to be able to read the test and pass it. Well, that's a setup, right? Like, okay, we're going to teach you this thing, but you can't pass the certification, which means that you cannot get the level of pay that you would if you got certified, which means that you're getting a subcontract of a subcontract. So instead of making $60 an hour, now you're making $20 an hour, which then feeds into housing. So, the housing to afford a two-bedroom apartment in Baltimore City, you have to make $28 an hour. The average income of somebody with a high school diploma in Baltimore City is like $16 an hour. Well, there's the gap. So people want to know why young people are squeeging. There's the gap. So we do not have a guaranteed income. We do not have a living wage. Our education system is setting kids up so they can't pass the certification exam and then they can't get employment that allows them to pay for housing.
NASW Press is the leading scholarly press in the social sciences. Our publications reach faculty, practitioners, agencies, and researchers in social work and related disciplines. Visit naswpress.org for scholarly books, reference works, brochures, and periodicals.
Well, Dr. K, you've actually broken a lot of stereotypes that like I read almost like daily that they are like lazy. This is easy like money. They don't have to pay like taxes on it. Some of them are making a few $100s a day. I don't know whether that's correct, but there's there's like a gap in like understanding between the like public and the politicians and these people. So how do you get them to like talk about a solution? And I also want to like add, there was a murder a few months back where um, a motorist got in an altercation with a group of people who squeegee, and he got out with a baseball bat, accosted them, and he ended up like shot. So that kind of like fueled even more controversy over it. Like, we ought to get them out of here, all of that. So, in the aftermath of all of this happening, how hard is it to find a solution and to get all of these like sides with each other?
Yeah, great question. So, you mentioned the altercation that happened. Again, you have to look at the bias in this situation. There was an altercation, but an adult male got out of his car with a baseball bat to come after youth, young people, children, and then one of the young people had a gun and shot the gentleman, right? So sometimes there's this like misrepresentation of what happened, like the young person was just standing around shooting ran like this was an adult male who came after a child with a baseball bat. And so yes, that did kind of light a fire under this and say like, hey, something has to happen. I do want to point out before I go into the solution conversation that as I was talking with youth, they were saying, but nobody's telling the story about how people are drivers are hitting children with their cars. Like literally, there's a young man who's been hit twice with a car and ended up in the hospital. All of his teeth have been knocked out, and he
Mm.
broke his pelvis. Okay, so let's talk about that and the harm that's happening to the children. But also, they talked about there are people who drive by and call them the N word. There are people who drive by and have a knife sitting on their lap and, looking at the young people, threatening them with a knife, right? So these are also, there are assaults that are happening to the young people that people aren't talking about. Now, as far as bringing people together for a solution, we in the collaborative, there has been a representation of all these different groups. So we have the squeegee workers in the room. We have businesses in the room. We have nonprofits in the room. We have racial justice, leaders in the room. And so we're all coming together and doing that work of really saying, we have to, let's start with the idea that we have to recognize the role of racism and systems of oppression in how we got here. Now let's talk about how we're going to try to address this issue. It's hard work, it's hard conversations, but we're going to get to a place that there is a solution that offers safety for everyone and well-being. Our children are not being taken care of. We need to do something about that as a community. If we are the village, we need to act as one.
Yeah. So, what could I? Because I'm a resident of Baltimore. I attend a church. We are part of like Bill, which is an organization of like faith-based ones who are working to uplift Baltimore. What can the like average person do to like help? I mean, I really wonder. I mean, I always keep a few dollars and
Hmm.
a lot of change. So if I have never had a problem with them at all. But that's like me when like I say like no. I have never had a person accost me or curse me out anything, but I always keep like a few dollars I give, but I'm always like thinking, what could I do more?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's a great question. One, help with the narrative and help get the word out and remind people these are young people, these are teenagers, these are children, right? And so when people are using all of these derogatory words describing, young people, these young gentlemen as all these negative things, we all have a responsibility to challenge that narrative and educate people. Hey, wait a minute, did you know? Da, 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 da. So that's one thing is education. The second thing is as the solution, the plan comes out, everybody should be looking at that plan to see what role can they play. Whether it be, oh, you want to help the squeegee workers, here is a way that you can donate. And that can go into and maybe it's a direct donation plan. I don't know what the plan is yet. We're still coming up with it. But it may be that there's okay, if you want to give to squeegee workers, here's a way you can do that. It could be that they say, well, we need volunteers. You could volunteer in that plan. If you have a business, You could say, okay, I'm happy to have a squeegee worker come and, have them as part of the business. So these are all things that, each person, every person can do. Also, voting and political advocacy. We can't sit back and say, well, these kids got to figure this out. No, 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 no. We need to be voting and saying, okay, well, let's talk about a living wage. Let's talk about guaranteed income. Let's talk about education reform. Those things have to be part of this, because these are the systems of oppression that are causing the situation to happen.
Yeah, but I mean, like sometimes Dr. K, it seems so overwhelming. I mean, I love Baltimore. I live in a neighborhood that's not like gentrified like fully. It's on the way, but there are really good people there, and there's a stereotype that it's like Mad Max Beyond like Thunderdome, and it isn't.
Right.
It's like real like people, but as you had like said, there's historic systemic racism. There's a redlining um issue. Our governor of Maryland, I was really angry because they wanted to like build a light rail that went from like west side, east side, where it's like needed. No, it actually goes up through like areas that are gentrified. So, it's not like
Yep.
helping. So, I mean, how do you not get overwhelmed with your like work and discouraged because it's like micro, meso, macro. It's all levels.
Yeah.
So
um, the challenges that I face as a social worker pales in comparison and is nothing compared to what people that I work with experience on a daily basis. So that's to start with. I am a very privileged person. I am a white female with a PhD, right? I almost check every box of privilege. Um, Except for the female thing. I mean, that's not so much, but I have all of these privileges, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
even when I have a day or I look at my work and go, am I making any difference at all? I have to think about the folks that I work with where they are in almost every category of oppressed populations, and yet every day they get up and try to make the city better. So I got nothing. I got nothing that I can look at and say, "Oh, I'm stressed." Like, well, you have a minute with some of the guys I work with, right?
yeah,
So I think as social workers, it's important for us to recognize our own privilege. And by definition, if we're social workers, at least in Maryland, you have to have a master's degree. You have to have licensing, which means you had a way to go to school, you have education, you have literacy, you have employment opportunities. That's a lot of privilege that we have to recognize. And then that really helps with like, I'm not going to be overwhelmed because look at the folks that I work with and what they have to deal with every day. I'm thankful and I'm blessed and I'm privileged. So move on and do the work.
yeah. So you had like mentioned earlier that you're working on a plan about
Mhm.
squeegee workers. What is this plan? I mean, is there an effort in the like city on this plan?
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said, the collaborative is made up of, people from the city government, nonprofits, business community, squeegee community, higher ed, all of that. And it's really a collaborative process. The plan is not ready yet. It's not out yet, but we do hope to have it out in this fall sometime.
Yeah, well, I want to like definitely follow up with you on it.
Yeah.
Before we let you go, though, I mean, I want to find out more about how you entered the social work profession. Where are you from, and how did you end up where you are now doing this wonderful work?
Thank you. So I grew up in DC, in Washington, DC. I grew up in Shaw, which is down the street from Howard University. I grew up, in the 80s in Shaw. So Shaw today is not the Shaw of the
No, it isn't.
80s. So, when I was growing up, it was at the height of the crack epidemic. It was at, DC was mostly crack. There was some heroin. It was also during the height of the AIDS epidemic. And so, I did grow up with crack pipes at the front, guys and gangs on the corners, open air drug markets, shootings regularly. I also grew up going to schools that were failing schools. So that, they usually have a rating system, 1 to 10, and one is the lowest. Those were the schools I went to.
Hmm.
And so, I went to school, honor roll, honor society, all of this. And then when I graduated and I went to college, I was confused as to why I was in remedial classes. And I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. Now, I was the only white kid in my neighborhood, in my church, in my elementary school. So I grew up as, in the predominantly Black community, learning about, systems of oppression, um, racism, civil rights movement. I went to Shiloh Baptist Church, which is a historically Black church founded by 19 runaway enslaved people.
I sang in
Um,
the choir there a few times in my youth, so small
Oh
world.
my gosh! At
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
children's choir?
Yeah, I grew up outside of DC in Upper Marlboro, and some of my neighbors attended there, so they would grab me on like Sundays, come on and like sing. So yeah, I know it well. I've actually been in a few weddings there, and my family is at 15th Street Presbyterian Church, which is right up the
Uh-huh.
street from it, which is another historically like black congregation of like DC. So small world, but no, go ahead.
Small world.
Enough about me.
No, no. And so, I did grow up in the children's choir, the youth choir. They have a deaf ministry, so I was signing at the deaf ministry. So
Wow.
I was there, 3, 4 days a week. And, on Sundays in a Black Baptist church, we start at 9 and we end on Tuesday. So, like I was there all the time. Um, and so, yeah, so when I went to college and I was like, well, why am I in a remedial class? But yet I was in honors society in my high school. And then I started to really think more, why did I have teachers giving us coloring sheets in AP biology? And when I asked, like, why are we coloring? The response from the teacher was, you're never going to be anything but a ditch digger. So it doesn't matter what I teach you.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Um, and so, my major was family sciences with a focus on the African American family, minor in women's studies. And so, I did more of the academic learning and sort of saying, oh, wait, now I have to understand. I'd learned about systems of oppression, I had learned about civil rights, and now I'm putting it at the micro level and go, oh, so when redlining happens, this is how it impacts the family and the person. Oh, now I'm making these connections. So I went to Smith College for my master's in social work. It's an anti-racist institution, so that all of my education was with a anti-racism lens, so that I could understand the clinical meaning, and also, as we're learning about some of the quote unquote fathers of psychology. So first of all, let's talk about fathers. Like, right, we were talking about the men, but I'm going to keep going. But also the misdiagnosis of, the African American community, the role of mental health in oppression, going back to the days of slavery, right? So, from there, I did my internship in Baltimore, Maryland, where I worked at Kennedy Krieger Family Center, trauma center for 10 years. And then I came to the University of Maryland, where I did place-based programming. But, I was very clear when people said, oh, can you go into this community and create a parenting program? Well, that doesn't make any sense. I am a white woman, not from Baltimore. I am not going to go into this neighborhood and say, hey, Black moms, this is how you should raise your children in the neighborhood you grew up in. So I really focused on partnering with people in the neighborhoods, where we were co-creating, like, oh, there's a parenting program. What do you think should be important? And so my dissertation was comparing the outcomes between when the mothers and fathers implemented the group to when social workers implemented the group. We had the same outcomes. So why are we paying social workers? Why are we having white social workers come into this predominantly Black neighborhood and say, okay, I'm going to tell you how to raise your children? That is not okay. It's patronizing, it's paternalistic,
Hmm.
and it upholds the racism. that occurs in this country. So, that has been my work for the past, 13 years, is really partnering with community and trying to say to predominantly white institutions or communities of privilege, we are not the experts in the life and experience of the communities we partner with. They are the experts. So our role should be to support, remove barriers, and access resources, not tell people how to raise their children or how to address the challenges that are currently happening.
Wow,
So that's my
amazing.
journey.
Yeah, a wonderful one. Wow, and interesting. I mean, I could do a podcast episode on a white woman at Shiloh Baptist Church just on its own. So yeah,
Right.
but Dr. K, it has really been a pleasure. I'm so glad that we had this opportunity to have you on, and thanks for being a guest with Social Work Talks podcast from NASW.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you.
You have been listening to NASW Social Work Talks, a production of the National Association of Social Workers. We encourage you to visit NASW's website for more information about our efforts to enhance the professional growth and development of our members, to create and maintain professional standards, and to advance sound social policies. You can learn more at www.socialworkers.org. And don't forget to subscribe to NASW Social Work Talks wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next episode.